Welcome to the Belarus Factor, the podcast where politics, power, and real talk about Belarus collide. I'm Ivan Kravtsov, broadcasting from exile and bringing you the truth behind the headlines. Hey everyone, and welcome to the 5th episode of Belarus Factor, a podcast about Belarus and political affairs in the region. Today I'm proud to present my guest, Kamil Klysinski, who is a senior fellow on Belarus in the Center for Eastern Studies in Warsaw, OSW. Kamil has been doing research for 18 years, I guess, on Belarus, and he knows the country very, very well, and I guess not only the Belarus, but all the neighboring countries. Kamil lives in Poland, Warsaw, so he has also a very good perspective on how Poland perceives Belarus and what Poland thinks about Belarus. Kamil, hello, how are you doing?
Hello, thank you, fine.
Probably we all have noticed that recently there have been a lot of movement around the war in the Ukraine. So the new administration, the Trump administration, have been taking an unprecedented moves connected to the peace talks. Trump has announced that he, during his election campaign, he was saying that he will end the war in 24 hours. Of course, it had never happened because I don't think that such a complex conflict could be ended so quickly, but nevertheless, there are some things happening. The talks in Riyadh at first, then Zelensky's visit to Washington, then talks with Putin, Witkov's visit to Moscow, vice versa, etc., etc. So, yeah, a lot of being discussed, a lot of being on the plate. We have been hearing different rumors, different configurations of possible ceasefire, 30-day ceasefire, or ceasefire on energetic infrastructure, etc., etc. But not much Belarus, right? So I have never heard anything from the US officials that they have been mentioning Belarus in the context of Russo-Ukrainian war. The only party I have heard about Belarus from is Russian President Vladimir Putin. Recently, Lukashenko has visited Moscow and then had a very grandiose event with press conference, dinner, etc., etc. And Lukashenko even asked Putin if, he will put a word for Belarus in these US-Russia negotiations. What's your perspective on this? Why Belarus is not mentioned? And is there really a topic about Belarus in this conversation?
I fully agree with you. It's not a lot about Belarus. It's not much about Minsk. We can use a very appropriate, adequate phrase here, in English language. I think it will be quite about this situation that Belarus is not only at the table, but even not on the table. Lukashenko maybe regrets that. Maybe he thinks that he could, to some extent, repeat this success, which indeed was achieved in 2014, 2015. When Belarus and Lukashenko personally was a host of peace negotiations about Ukraine during this first war, let's call it in this way. So yes, Minsk agreements, Minsk 1, Minsk 2, and maybe Belarus again will be in the center of attention, in the center of negotiations between West and East. That Western leaders will come. I think that. The best situation for Lukashenko, which he can imagine, that Trump is coming. That means, but of course this is fantasy. We understand, and as you said, we can see that Belarus is not a key player here. Even is not the best first place for negotiations, as we see. Saudi Arabia is favorite place so far. All meetings were there. Maybe Turkey is a little bit higher, just in case, as a second option. Belarus, I would call it, in very optimistic way, third option. So far, we have only confirmation from Dmitry Peskov, spokesman of Putin, that Belarus could be the best place for negotiations. But this is only Peskov, with all due respect to him. And Lukashenko maybe is disappointed. I'm pretty sure that even not maybe, for sure is disappointed. He expects more, but so far he's out of this game. I have impression that Belarus is not in focus of new American administration. We had so far only one visit in February of Christopher Smith from the Department of State, quite high level. From this structure, Christopher Smith is a well-known diplomat responsible for Belarus, but not only. He has quite wide portfolio, and this visit was quite mysterious. We had leaks from New York Times, but only leaks, not confirmed information, that American administration considers some exchange for political prisoners. They, let's assume, could be ready to soften some part of sanctions on potassium, but we don't have any confirmation. And after this visit, we don't have even any statement from Washington. We have a lot of statements about Ukraine, about Russia. Personally, also, they are coming from Donald Trump, from his account on X platform. But we don't have any statements, any position on Belarus.
The only thing I think that we have seen that when Belarus released an American citizen, a woman, before the Chris Smith visit, there was a statement from Marco Rubio, I think, on the X, that he welcomed the unilateral release from Belarus. I think you're right. The visit of Christopher Smith was mostly connected with getting U.S. citizens out of jail. But nevertheless, I also haven't seen any statements from the U.S. side about the presidential elections that were held in Belarus in January. All of the European countries have been very vocal and clear about condemning these elections and naming them unfree and not recognizable. But there have been no statement from the U.S. administration about that. So we could treat probably it as a sign, but I agree with you, it's a weak sign, right? It's not something proactive. But getting back to Russo-Ukrainian war, but how can Belarus be not at the table when there is, a huge border on the north that Ukraine has with Belarus? There have been so much business interests and trade interests before the war between Ukraine and Belarus. Ukraine was one of the biggest trade partners. The oil exports were flowing to Ukraine from Belarus. So how could it be that Belarus is not in the agenda? What is the reason for that?
This is a big challenge for Lukashenko. If we would like to look at this formally, according to international law, Belarus should be included into negotiations because it's co-aggressor against Ukraine. So ceasefire or peace treaty should be not only between Russia and Ukraine, but also between Belarus and Ukraine. But this is very formal point of view. Practical view is that Belarus that doesn't count, that doesn't play enough important role. Even looking from the perspective of Kiev, we don't have any statement. So I can understand. In majority of cases, I have a problem with understanding of Lukashenko, but here I can understand him. That really he should try to do something with that, to improve the position of Belarus due to common border with Ukraine, due to maybe some perspectives of trade, which could appear very theoretically, but anyway, after ceasefire or peace treaty, maybe some partial opening of border. There are many options here, and of course, Belarusian diplomacy should try to achieve something here.
But I think they're looking at Russia a lot. They're quite constrained in their moves, I believe, because the dependence in Russia has been growing since 2020, since the political crisis has started. And this is also the question to me, is it beneficial for Putin to have Belarus at the table? There are some opinions that, for Russia, maybe this is not appropriate. But nevertheless, maybe Putin can use Belarus as another bargaining chip, as a card when talking to the US and others. What do you think? Could be Belarus, used as some utility in these conversations from Putin, or this is just some symbolic statements about, Union states and being allied together?
I think that Russia is not going to resign from anything which is connected to Belarus. This exclusive zone of influence, and I cannot imagine that Belarus is on the table as a one of cards. Trump likes to use this expression. We have cards, and you don't have cards. Of course, Trump has a lot of cards, and that Belarus could be even potentially one of cards of Putin or between Putin and Trump. No, I don't think that this is possible. So far, we don't have any statements on that. We don't have even any rumors, which also shows that maybe this is not on agenda. I mean, participants of Belarus in some peace processes, negotiations. But we should remember that maybe this is not accident. That Lukashenko was at the same day in Moscow when Vitkov, special representative envoy from Washington, appeared. Maybe I had the impression that Putin wanted to have someone, some additional, let's say, loyal leader from another state. Belarus is still independent, formally independent state, who will support him, and they could hold together press conference when they will present this anti-Western, anti-Ukrainian view, and that Putin is not alone. This is some kind of psychotherapy for him, and also Lukashenko needs that as well. So I think that Belarus is in Russian strategy somewhere in plans, but not as a card for game with Trump. Maybe more as a visibility of alliance, a visibility of support on post-Soviet space, and the visibility of common line, for example, towards Ukraine.
As Zelensky is also assembling the coalition, right? Starmer has announced coalition of the willing. So it seems for Putin, the United States alliance with Belarus is a way to mirror these activities and also say that we do have the coalition. But in terms of negotiations, I mean, maybe at some point when the format will move from bilateral to some maybe multilateral format, I would expect that maybe some Belarusian officials could appear on the table exactly because of the same idea, to put someone and say, this is not only Russia, this is like some states that support the strategy, etc., etc. It doesn't mean this is about independent agenda, but as in terms of theatrical performance, I think at some point of view, Belarus could be brought in by Putin.
I agree. If we think in this way, as a part of spectacle, some theater, it could be, yes.
I think this also gets us to a very important point that Belarus has become highly dependent on Russia, and not only economically because of the Western sanctions, which were introduced after the political crisis of 2020 and after the war has started in Ukraine, but also because of the general inclination of Lukashenko and his bet on China, his bet on Russia, and Russia obviously supporting his regime very much. So these signs that the dependency has been increasing lately a lot, these are worrying signs, because we could, find ourselves in the situation that, for example, U.S. embassy could open in Moscow, but it will not open in Minsk. And that would mean, and that would be quite, I think, problematic, because even, with a Lukashenko in charge, we're limiting the ability of our country to be put on agenda, and the people in the West, they forget more and more about Belarus and don't think it's relevant to think about Belarus. So do you also see these signs of dependency, not only economical, but political dependency, and mostly and on international arena? Does Lukashenko totally, dependent in his moves on Russia? Can he do something by himself? Could he initiate something by himself?
I'm afraid that this Russian influence, Russian dominance is so advanced that Lukashenko is not able to do serious steps, I mean strategic steps, not internal decisions, for example, about a construction of government. It was his decision, of course, but on international arena, in foreign policy, Lukashenko is fully dependent. Even in case of his activities on other continents, for example, in Africa, he confirmed more than 1 year ago, at the beginning of 2024, I still didn't remember this statement, he confirmed that he has consulted with Putin his visits in Equatorial Guinea and Kenya. Maybe you remember this famous trip of Lukashenko when he visited several African countries. It was in December 2023, and it wasn't independent action. Lukashenko consults his activities with Putin. This is combined. This is joint effort. There should be no collision, no clash with Russian interest, with Russian presence, and also this issue, this problem, of course, appears in bilateral relations between Moscow and Minsk. In of course, all steps towards West. Mostly hostile steps, confrontational. We also should remember, I'm pretty sure that both countries, Minsk and Belarus, they hold the same position, and they do joint hybrid war against West. So this is combined action, and everything should be here consulted and discussed, agreed. There's no space for independent moves.
Do you think Lukashenko is comfortable with that? Do you think there are signs that he would be willing to change this?
He would like to change this, but only in his way, in a very specific way, that West will, out of the blue, one day accept everything what is going on in Belarus, and Lukashenko maybe also one day will release part of political prisoners, maybe will do something very symbolically in other sectors, but everything will be the same. Let's leave it as it is. This is a proposal which is coming from Minsk, together with a lot of disinformations and provocations. Maxim Nezhenkov, relatively new head of a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is very good at that. He's one of the most visible provocators nowadays from official Minsk, from the Belarusian side. Lukashenko maybe is not fully comfortable with that, because of course the best option will be to have good relations, some investments, some technologies, loans also from West, not only from Russia or China. But the most important for him is to keep power, to be still Alexander Lukashenko in power as a president, so-called from our perspective, a president of Belarus. And only Russia, according to him, could guarantee this position. He still remembers all developments in 2020, and it's visible. It's even not a question. This is answered question that Lukashenko has very deep trauma after 2020. He remembers that dialogue with West, cooperation with West, led him and his system, his regime, to the brink, to very big danger, and that he survived only or mostly thanks to Russian support in 2020. That's why he is relatively comfortable with that, understanding that only cooperation with Russia is let's say, the best available solution for him.
Well, you're saying he's ready for some tactical moves if they're not impeding his internal political power and his internal control. But in terms of not maybe political changes, but in terms of economic situation in the country, there is, I think, a growing dependency on Russian market and on Russia supply chains. Before the 2020 and before the war in Ukraine, Even Lukashenko, he stated the strategy of 3/3, 1/3 trade balance with EU, 1/3 trade balance with Russia, and 1/3 trade balance with the rest of the world. It's not longer the case. I think Russia is now the main trading partner. More than 50% of exports, I guess, even 60%.
I would say even 90%.
Even 90.
If we will include all goods which are going through Russia to China, if we look at transit by railways, but if we include also transit by seaports to other markets, for example, potassium to Brazil, let's assume that oil products, according to rumors, maybe to United Arab Emirates, maybe to other countries, they also use Russian seaports. So this is 90% of export.
Yeah, and you have recently written about various economic sectors which have been affected by sanctions and by internal political crisis. Do you think there is a principal change in those? And do you think this is an irreversible change, or there is still an opportunity, to diversify back? Potash, for example. As I know, Russian potash is not sanctions, and it's a bit of a paradox that Belarus has sanctions on potash and Russia doesn't. Do you think this is critical for the regime? What is the impact of on these sectors? Do they think it's critical, or they're fine with that and they have adapted?
We have to divide two spheres as usual in case of this kind of non-democratic regimes. That one sphere, one area, there are public statements. In public statements, they are very brave. That we compensated everything. Dmitry Krutoy, now he's head of presidential administration, but 1 year ago he was ambassador of Belarus in Moscow. He was very often active in public, and in his statements we could hear that we compensated everything thanks to our Russian friends, thanks to enormously growing exchange with Russia, trade with Russia. But things are not so positive as they would like to present it to us. I think it's a big problem. From time to time we can see some attempts from their sides, from the side of Russian authorities, to soften that sanctions, for example, to sue European operators, Lithuanian government, in this case, other countries, to sue and to take them to the court, just about sanctions. And this is not only about a propaganda that they would like to show that they are active, that they don't agree with sanctions. This is real need to open previous channels. Klaipeda is still, it's closed, but it's still the best option, the best channel for export of potassium. Not Murmansk, not Leningradsky district, Petersburg, not Arkhangelsk, and not Russian railways with maybe not the best tariffs and very long distance to China. So this is really a challenge. If we would like to touch upon our American sanctions, this is also an interesting issue, because American sanctions they concern also potassium, and they are much more effective than the European sanctions. And for example, Belarus in last years lost Indian market in India almost completely. This is something about zero of dollars of income from this export because of American sanctions. Indian buyers, Indian importers or previous importers of Belarusian potassium, they are afraid of consequences which could come from American sanctions. Here we have quite real, quite concrete figures of losses. So this is not such a positive situation that according to and thanks to Russian support, they are able to compensate everything. It's not possible. They understand that. Lukashenko is complaining. Several days ago, he spoke to new Prime Minister Alexander Turchin also about that. He's complaining about a deterioration of trade balance. Now deficit is growing and quite rapidly, quite visibly. So this is also due to sanctions.
But if Lukashenko is not ready for political concessions, maybe he would be ready to, for example, release political prisoners, allow the work of non-government, non-state media in the country in exchange of some economic sanctions relief. Do you think this is the case, if they really have a genuine need for that?
This is question about credibility, how credible Lukashenko is, how toxical or not toxical he is. I'm afraid that answer cannot be positive. We went through too many difficulties and crises which were created not by us, not by West, but by a Belarusian side. I don't only mean, of course, political crisis in 2020, which was the basic crisis, which was the very early beginning of all of that, but also migration crisis, migration pressure, this so-called hijacking of airplane. In May, it was even before migration crisis, and of course, participants in Russian aggression towards Ukraine. It means that we cannot trust Lukashenko even on non-emotional, pragmatic level of any transaction. One day he will release 300 people for softening of sanctions, let's assume, very theoretically. Several days after, he will order to arrest 400 people. And we'll expect that maybe for this new group of newly recently arrested people, Lukashenko would expect again even deeper softening of sanctions or lifting of sanctions. With all due respect to all people who are suffering in jails, of course, we understand that this is a very difficult situation. It shouldn't be like that. Sanctions can be lifted only in exchange for changes in Belarus, some concrete steps. Releasing of political prisoners should be, let's say, entering condition that after releasing of all political prisoners, we can start negotiations about some more advanced concessions. Order of appearance is very important here. Lukashenko is not ready for any significant changes. He is only able theoretically for forgive me this expression, but we should be quite straight for this trade with people, releasing people in exchange for sanctions. This is not a business for the West.
This is not the first time that we have political prisoners in Belarus. There were arrests in 2010, 2006. So we all know that Lukashenko is a dictator. I don't know if any dictator could be trusted pragmatically, but still, states do deals with dictators. They talk to them, they do business with them just because they have effective control in the country. And if you want to do something within the country, you have to deal with them. And don't you think, and I understand this very hard-lining position that political prisoners release could be a precondition, but what are you saying that the West should then, pursue the goal of regime change in Belarus? And is it really, a feasible strategy for any negotiation if you come to a stakeholder and say, look, we will ready to talk to you if you go away, right? This is not very realistic. I think this is what also Trump says about Putin, how you can start negotiations if you call names to the person, right? Do you actually close any opportunities for the negotiations with Lukashenko? Because, as you have said, he has no genuine interest in the regime change. So if we say that the objective of such negotiations is regime change, so no negotiations could be happening while Lukashenko is in power. What do you think about that? So you're just closing the option for the Western counterparts.
I have not such power to close any option for Western counterparts.
Theoretically,
this is
right?
only my opinion as an expert, one of many experts who are interested in Belarusian affairs and who deal with Belarus. It's only opinion. So this is first thing. Second thing, I value this kind of provocative questions, but I have a provocative answer. Maybe the first window of opportunity, even of small opportunity, will be death of Lukashenko. Only biological factor could open some possibilities. When we assume, and I fully agree that this is very adequate position, that Lukashenko is not ready for any real dialogue. He is only ready for some exchange for people, which is not stable, cannot be stable state of play. Once we assume that, we have to wait for more pragmatic leader of Belarus. I think that any successor of Lukashenko, we have a lot of options. It could be Viktor Lukashenko, it could be, I don't know, Alexander Wolfowicz, maybe not Natalia Kasianova, despite she is, of course, pointed out at new constitution, but I rather doubt. So maybe Alexander Wolfowicz, maybe I don't know, Dmitry Miklutoy, many possible people, maybe Alexander Turchin. Recently we can see that Lukashenko likes him and trusts him. I think that all of them could be more pragmatic. I don't think that they are Democrats, of course, and they don't maybe necessarily believe in human rights as a main issue, but anyway, some steps, some concessions could be possible.
I've heard these opinions that, of course, with strongman's death, there are like some windows opportunities opening. You know, you can say the same about Russia, right? So we can wait, you know, for Putin to disappear, and then it would be easier to negotiate peace with Ukraine. The problem is, you know, you have a time constraint, so because no one knows how long you have to wait. It could be 1 year, it could be 10 years, it could be 15 years. You know, the medical conditions of those leaders is a speculative topic. You have written a lot, I think, on the questions of possible transit of power in Belarus. You also have mentioned deteriorating health conditions. I know some media in Belarus, they really love this topic. I remember 10 years ago and 15 years ago, every time Lukashenko coughs or walks not very steadily, there are forecasts of regime end, you know, which will happen in very soon. Transit of power. You have been pinpointing and highlighting, you have put a lot of effort into research of the constitutional reform that was going on. The talks about transit of power were even before 2020. There were some talks about that, I think, and you have written on that. So do you still believe there will be a controlled transition of power in Belarus while Lukashenko is alive? Or now it's to you the most probable scenario that the transitional power will actually happen only if he will die?
I think that this second option is more probable. Death is, of course, something final. You don't have any alternative options. This is everything was done. It's finished, and you have to do something. Lukashenko didn't prepare any, let's say, reliable, effective scheme mechanism of transition. For me, it's obvious, and I think this is not very new observation. This is the result of his approach to power. This is something personal for him. Power and his life, private life, a professional life. This is the same thing. He's a hostage of his position. He built this political system. He is in power more than 30 years. This is something like addiction. And he understands that this is also the best guarantee of his security and the security of his family. That's why I don't believe that Lukashenko will, on a voluntary basis, let's say it in this way, resign from power, unless he will die or will be seriously ill. He will keep this position of the so-called president of Belarus, main person in the country. As we don't have and we cannot expect in a foreseeable future that this clear mechanism of transit of power will appear, it could be chaos. It could be at least a little chaos, at least as the most optimistic option, very short, but in still chaos in nomenclatura. They will be maybe surprised, maybe not by his death. They will try to let's say appoint someone. It will be very big challenge because there are quite many people who think that only Lukashenko is number one and there is no number two. Lukashenko never suggested that there's some person in the country, in his entourage, in his environment, who is number two. People are used to have only number one. So it will create at least a short and a little chaos. It could be some struggle between key players, key people in nomenclatura. And I can imagine that Russian embassy with Boris Gryzlov or maybe another ambassador, it depends on time, on period, will be also a very important place at that time in Minsk, and there will be a lot of consultations, and maybe it even will be some race who will be faster, more effective, and more convincing to Russian partners that he's able to keep everything in good order, in good appearance in the country, and could offer Russian interlocutors that their influence they will be kept.
Talking about mechanisms, so you don't think this new constitution with People's Assembly in it and the institute of the chair of the People's Assembly is actually a mechanism of transit of power, mechanism that, an opportunity that Lukashenko will step aside and there will be a different president in Belarus?
Theoretically could be. There is some resemblance to Kazakh patterns, but Lukashenko, of course, has excellent knowledge about all developments in post-Soviet space, and also he knows how it went in Kazakhstan in reality, not according to plans. That this Yelbasi, Nursultan Nazarbayev, was let's say a little bit marginalized by Tokayev, his successor. That something went wrong. I'm not an expert on Kazakhstan, so I cannot explain now why it was like that. But it wasn't the most satisfying option for this former leader, for this male leader, creator of nation. Lukashenko also perceives himself as a creator of nation and state, and I think that he's not satisfied with this model in Kazakhstan, and he is afraid that any concessions on that could lead him into the same way, into the same direction. That's why I think that he will keep both posts, both position, so head of this assembly and of course a president of Belarus. But we also should notice, to be honest, that Lukashenko more and more repeats very interesting phrase, interesting statements, that we raised new generation of managers, of economists, of people who will be in 5, in 6 years responsible for the country. He mentioned that very recently on the 10th of March, when he appointed finally a new prime minister, and it was Alexander Turchin. And Lukashenko mentioned that we have this kind of group of very talented young, of course, comparing to his age, young, very relatively young, between 45 and 55, roughly speaking, group of talented administrators, managers who are able to do that, to do more, and to take more responsibility for the country. He suggested that in this group, of course, is Alexander Turchin, but also Dmitry Krutoy, first deputy of Prime Minister Nikolai Snopkov, Roman Golovchenko maybe is there as a new head of central bank, and This is also very interesting issue. Maybe Lukashenko thinks about some future. He is afraid that maybe he's not the youngest person. He's not a spring chicken, but this is still too general. This is not exact mechanism of transition. This is only very early stage of the preparation.
It's an interesting message, actually, that I hear from you, that it looks like you say that Lukashenko is actually not pragmatic enough. So, and you repeat it when we talk about international relations, and now you repeat it when we talk about internal political transit. It seems like you really think he has fallen to his own identity, and he starts doing mistakes that he didn't do before, right? Because I think the way he stayed in power, that he was more rational, more pragmatic than his opponents sometimes, and now he's falling into the same trap that probably others, were before. It's a very interesting point.
Lukashenko before 2020 was much different, I would say. He was a real player. His political game also on international area. If we look at international policy, foreign policy of Belarus at that time, when Vladimir Mackay was implemented, but of course Lukashenko was accepted, was even let's assume the creator of key points of this game. It was a real game, and he was a player. That's why we believed at that time, including me, I mean this period before 2020, that he can be some interlocutor, some counterpart for many transactions. We achieved a lot, but everything was destroyed within several days in August 2020.
It's a pity. It's a pity for the country and for the people. Getting maybe a bit back to Russia-Ukraine war, do you think that if the ceasefire agreement will be struck, and I don't know about lasting peace, but the things will de-escalate, do you think when economic sanctions, maybe partially, will be removed from Russia, does it mean that they will be also removed from Belarus? Are they linked? And maybe Lukashenko is expecting this. Maybe he's not doing any moves because he wants to see how these negotiations will play out at first, and then, do something after that.
This is a very good question. We have to get into his mind, which maybe is also quite a risky adventure.
A methodological problem, I would
and
say.
a methodological and a psychological problem. I'm not a medical doctor, which always is an obstacle in my work, especially when I try to understand Lukashenko. But anyway, I think that indeed it would be some window of opportunity for Belarus. This lifting or softening sanctions from American side, but I don't think that it would happen automatically. It will need separate negotiations between Washington and Minsk. Maybe after some consultations with Putin, we cannot exclude that. Maybe after some lobbying from the Putin side. But of course, it would be very good context for some steps from Minsk. I can imagine that even now, Belarusian diplomacy is seeking better contacts in American administration. I would do that being on the position. Not Christopher Smith, but someone a little bit higher, maybe closer to Trump. This is, I think, it should be looking from their perspective urgent task.
It's also interesting that the Belarusian regime hasn't utilized the opportunities with Poland, because the very prominent political prisoner Andrei Pachobot is being held hostage by the regime for many years now. And I think the Polish MFA, at least during the first years of the crisis after 2020, and even in the context of migration crisis on the border, was still quite pragmatic and was still trying to, as you have said, do some transactions with Lukashenko. So they asked about Pachobot And it doesn't seem a very difficult thing to deliver. So my question is why Lukashenko has underplayed the possibilities with Poland so much. Why didn't he try to engage with Poland? Because I think Poland actually could have been a very important sponsor and a very important sponsor for him, even, though he was condemned as a dictator, but Poland is a neighboring country, and I think it's genuinely interested in de-escalation of the situation in the region. So what do you think? Why are the reasons for that? Why are they trying so hard to, make ties with Americans, and they're not really trying to talk to Poland?
Ties with Americans appeared better ties after change in United States of America, after new presidential administration. Donald Trump has started a new approach, not mostly as we discussed towards Belarus. Belarus is not a key point here in his strategy, but generally towards Russia, of course, which is one of main targets. China, of course, is even more important for Trump. Ukraine as a pivotal, a substantial country. So this is not because of some huge change in the Belarusian approach, which still remains the same.
And before Trump?
Before Trump, I couldn't see before Trump any serious steps from American side to talk with
But
Minsk.
I mean Poland. So I think there have been a lot of opportunities to engage with Polish government, the border, the migration crisis. So they put migrants on the border, right? And they attacked border. So this hybrid offensive. Why was he so reluctant to discuss that?
In your question, this is an answer. I would put it in this way for maybe some doubts why I am so hardliner here in this interview, why I am so firm about Lukashenko and skeptical. Because we can see, according to many sources, many also observing a behavior of Lukashenko, observing lack of serious proposals, we can judge that they are not interested in real dialogue. Andrzej Poczobut is a test. Of course, he's a human first of all, but his case is a test for willingness of Minsk to do something. This is not true that we are so skeptical and so hard that we are not ready, not able to do any transaction with Minsk. Case of Andrzej Poczobut is very good evidence that we are not flexible. We are to some extent. Everything is on the table, even in public. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Radosław Sikorski, other representatives of Polish authorities announced our terms. Andrzej Poczobut, we can exchange freedom of Andrzej Poczobut for border crossing in Bobrovniki. This is concrete transaction, very pragmatical, because we closed this point after unjust sentence, which was given in 2023, 8 years of jail. And so after his liberation, after his releasing, we can open this border point. Minsk knows that. Offer was delivered many times, repeated, but lack of willingness means to me that they are not ready, not interested in a dialogue. They first goal of them towards us, towards Baltic states as well, maybe other countries in the European Union. This is hybrid war. This is keep pressure on our borders. This is provoke us to organize acts of diversion, sabotage in Poland, other countries. We have a lot of data about that, and I'm pretty sure that this is still their strategy. Maybe it will change after peace talks between United States and Russia, maybe. But so far, they keep this confrontational, not constructive position.
What are they trying to achieve with this hybrid warfare?
To check our resilience, this is one of their goals. to keep tension on our border, to also to distract our attention from Ukraine. That some parts of our assets we have to devote to counteracting. So there are many goals to show that we are enemies, that we have to talk with them. This is also some kind of blackmailing. I remember 2023 when many Belarusian experts, and at that time I could agree that Lukashenko really believed that maybe he will force Poland, also Lithuania, Latvia, to talk using those migrants. It was completely wrong. We were very consequent and let's say convinced that it's not any solution here. But Lukashenko maybe was so naive that he believed that maybe using such terrorist methods, hybrid war methods, he could force us to open negotiations.
Thank you, Kamil, for this very insightful conversation. I think we have touched upon a lot of topics or a lot of things on the agenda right now. We couldn't have hoped to cover all them deeply during this short episode of the Belarus Factor, the podcast on Belarusian affairs and the region. This was Kamil Klysinski, Senior Fellow working on Belarus in Center for Eastern Studies, OSW. He's been doing research on Belarus for 18 years, and thank you very much for a very insightful discussion.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
You just heard Belarus Factor, a podcast about Belarus and me, Ivan Kravtsov. Please subscribe to our social media channels, share with your friends, and support Belarusian political prisoners.